Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Integrator Arena Podcast with Brian Wirtz. Brian is the owner and founder of W3 Integrator Arena. How are we doing today, Brian?
I'm wonderful. Really glad to be here, Mike.
Thanks for joining us today. Brian is a retired Marine who's transitioned into the entrepreneurial world as a fractional integrator for companies running on EOS. And now, Brian, you're, from what I understand, you're now helping others do the same thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm building a training business.
So you're helping integrators become brilliant in the basics and win.
Exactly.
So, Brian, before we dive into all this, and sounds like it's we have quite a bit to talk about. Give us a little bit about your background. Let's dive into you a little bit here.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. So, I'm a retired Marine. I've been I spent my entire Marine Corps career doing operations of various types, project management, program management, some operations in active theaters, and retired about a little over 10 years ago into the business sector. Really wanted to figure out how to do my own thing. But my first kind of opportunities out of the Marine Corps were working in various types of local businesses out of San Diego, where I live. Over about a 5-year period, I took on a few different roles in different sized companies. Each role was very different from each other. Looked kind of weird from a resume standpoint, but in my mind, I was really trying to build myself a broad base to become an entrepreneur. Did that for about 5 years. Was at the end of that time really getting ready to jump out and try and do my own thing in recruiting, of all things. And my timing was horrible. COVID started. Nobody was hiring. So that was really when I'd already kind of started to learn about EOS. And it was that point where I really made my pivot that got me started on the path that I'm on right now.
Okay. That sounds like a long way to get there. And that's pretty awesome, though. So for those of us who don't know, what is EOS and why does the integrator role exist?
Well, thanks, Mike. That's a great question. So what is EOS and why does the integrator role exist? Well, it's actually, EOS stands for the Entrepreneurial Operating System. It is a business operating system, or really a people management, a people process, and in all things about your business management system. It is not a software. It was designed by the founder of EOS, Gino Wickman, whom really kind of looked at a lot of different systems out there or a lot of different business practices and just tried to bring together a best of breed approach. And I like it because what it does, it has 6 key components to it. And it's complete and simple. And to me, it's that combination of both being simple, but yet having everything you need that makes it pretty attractive. And within companies running on this particular business system, they talk about 2 roles that often exist in a lot of small businesses or entrepreneurial businesses. One of them is like a visionary, a founder, somebody that kind of has a bunch of big and grand ideas and likes to always be thinking of the next big thing. And then you also need someone that can run internally and make stuff happen. And that's what the integrator is. They're the person inside the company, often partnered with that visionary that, for lack of a better term, get stuff done, or, you can throw a more colorful word in there. But the integrator is the make it happen person that allows the visionary's vision to come to life.
Okay. All right. See, I learned something new today. So what problems inside growing companies does the integrator role actually solve?
There's so many, right? The growing companies, I think in the early days of EOS, they figured they logged something like 135 different common issues, whether it be people issues or financial issues or operational issues. There's a lot of these issues, whether you're running a plumbing company, you're running a scientific company, you're running any type of business, a real estate company. All of these companies are going to run into the same types of issues, and they may present slightly different, but they figured out all of these things happen everywhere you go. So the concept of EOS. It's to simplify all these issues and give you a tool set to really be able to solve them all consistently, and I never like to say easily, but simply, in a way that is repeatable, sustainable, and lets you continue to grow.
Perfect. So what are, just from your experience, what are some of the most common issues that you were talking about, issues and problems, just the most common ones?
People, I mean, at the end of the day, so integrators, so what do integrators solve? I mean, they solve financial problems, they solve sales problems, but in most cases, we have a saying like most issues are either people or process. And frankly, even if it's a process issue, oftentimes there's a people component to it. And
Sure.
and people are complex, people are tough, and leadership requires a lot of the leaders to help get people to where they need to be or make the people changes. And that's oftentimes it's the people changes. I think one of the biggest things small businesses have a hard time doing is letting go of the people that are not in alignment with their values or don't really, get one or have the capacity to do what it is that needs to be done.
That was a great answer. So from your experience, what do most people misunderstand about the integrator role when they first hear about it?
That's really a great question. I think a lot of it depends on who's looking at the integrator role, but the integrator is really this number 2 role in a small business. I think sometimes the visionary, the founder, the owner, one of the things that they can misunderstand oftentimes is the significance of this role. And sometimes they might view it as, because in EOS we don't use titles, we use roles, and the integrator is a role, it's not a title. From a title standpoint, a lot of times an integrator might get the role of like a COO or a president, perhaps, if they have a CEO and then a president, or they might be like a senior VP of operations. All of these things, if they were a title, sound really important, but they also oftentimes have a connotation of being operations. And frankly, that is not the role of the integrator. The integrator is actually a cross-functional role, right? So if operations is one part of a small business, but really every business has to do 3 core things. They have to sell and market, they have to market and sell something. They have to deliver what they're selling, and then they have to have good financial and administrative processes to take care of it. Those 3 major functions have a lot of cross-leveling or a lot of things that need to happen in concert with one another to be effective. The integrator sits above all those. So the number 1 misconception I see is that people view the integrator as actually the operations leader, and that's just not the right level. The integrator really needs to be able to sit over all of those. The other common conception I've seen or misconception I've seen could be that the integrator is actually more like an executive assistant, right? They are an assistant to the visionary founder. Don't get me wrong, that's a clearly valuable and highly important role. Again, it's slightly different though. That person would be there to help the visionary, the founder, do more, take things off their plate that they don't like, they're not good at. But really what that person's doing is an entirely different role than the integrator who's doing the cross-functional high-level leadership and helping the company win, achieve their P&L and move forward.
Perfect. Another great answer. So why do you think the role has become more important as the company grows?
The integrator role becomes more important as the company grows because at each level of growth, you're adding either scale of people, scale of systems, you're adding layers of complexity. And complexity points are potential issues or things that can be challenges for the business. And so as it gets more complex, whether again it be with people, processes, technology, you need somebody that can be the overarching like conductor of all the moving pieces to help reduce that friction. I've always loved the quote, I think it's from Oliver Wendell Holmes, that says, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but basically he says for simplicity on the near side of complexity, I wouldn't give you a fig. For simplicity on the far side of complexity, I would give you the world, right? So the whole idea is we deal with complexity. When we're keeping it simple, but we haven't factored in the complexity, we're not going to go anywhere. We're just going to spin our wheels because there's all these problems we're not solving. But when we can get through all those problems and get it back to being simple, that's beauty. That is effectiveness. That's efficiency. The integrator is the person that helps doesn't deal with all the complexity themselves, but they help the team become really great at managing and moving through complexity and getting to the other side.
Okay. Yeah, that clears that up really well for me. So through all your experiences, and it sounds like you've dealt with, quite a variety of different companies. Could you just tell me a story of how you first encountered the integrator role, learned about it, and what drew you to it?
Well, I love that that question, because I actually learned about the integrator role through another veteran. This was pre-COVID, and as veterans, we have our own kind of we will connect with each other on LinkedIn, and I connected with, I would say, a high connector veteran, somebody that had his own pretty broad network. And we got together for a virtual meeting, had a couple good conversations, really hit it off. And he was like, have you ever read this book, Rocket Fuel? And Rocket Fuel is the book by Gino Wickman, again, the founder of EOS, and his co-author, Mark C. Winters. And basically, this book talked about the relationship between the visionary and the integrator. These two key roles that, when combined and are the right fit, can really supercharge any business. So I read this book, I'm going to guess probably around 7.5, 8 years ago, at the recommendation. I'll go ahead and give him a plug. Scott R. Tucker, who runs a company called Vet Wealth. Scott told me about the book, and I read it. My mind at the time, I was still a full-time employee. I was in a civilian, or I was in a corporate recruiting role for a general contractor. And my mind was on becoming an entrepreneur and how I was going to run my own business. And again, I thought, hey, I can actually find lots of veterans, because I think veterans are this perfect number 2 role to run in a small business. So I can go find veterans and I can place them with visionaries, and they can become strong duos. That was my concept. Again, pre-COVID, timing was horrible. I was outside of COVID, getting ready to land my first two recruiting contracts when the world stopped. And I'm like, well, I can't be running a recruiting business when nobody knows what's going on. So I was like, well, if I'm making the case that veterans can make good integrators, and I am now available, well, I think I could be a great integrator. So instead of trying to run a placement business, I found my first opportunity. I shifted my gears to finding an opportunity to be an integrator. I became one, and then I started on that path. So I took on my first integrator role in 2020, so about 6 years ago, and have been growing along that path ever since.
Perfect. So I'm sure that you've learned quite a few things throughout those last 6 years. But in your opinion, how did your background, and I'm talking about including as well as in the Marine Corps and later on in business, shape the way you think about leadership and operational discipline?
Thank you, Mike. I love this question. So in the Marine Corps, I was in the Marine Reserves before I became a Marine officer. And from the day you get into the Marines, and I think, frankly, any branch of the military, you always have this concept of you're a team, right? And if two Marines go walking, they say one of them's always in charge. You're a team, and then one of them, and the joke is, like, you have 2 Marines of the same rank, and they'll go all the way down to, like, when's their day to rank, or even their birthday or whatever, but somebody's going to be in charge. And so there's always this concept of teamwork and leadership paired together. when I became an officer, I was introduced to the concept of a platoon commander and a platoon sergeant, right? Where you have an officer who gets assigned a leadership of a platoon. There's certain roles that come along with that. And then you have a more experienced senior enlisted, a platoon sergeant who's been around, has a lot more experience, frankly, than the officer, and they have to work together as a duo. And either one of them, they both need things from each other and they have to collaborate. And that grows throughout your military time until we have, as you proceed forward, you have then executive officers and commanding officers, where the executive officer is actually supporting the commanding officer who's focused on one set of outward focusing activities of the company, where the executive officer is helping running the training and developing, kind of mentoring the other officers. So this two-headed leadership framework has been built into me for decades at this point, from the time I entered the Marine Corps, and I saw that it worked. What I didn't know and what I didn't have, I before I got out of the Marine Corps, I was able to go back, get a master's degree. I got an MBA, so did fairly well in the MBA program. But in the Marines, while I got lots of leadership and management experience, I joke the only time I ever saw a dollar or cent was when I was filing a travel claim. Right? I never dealt with any budgets. I never had any business experience. I did Marine recruiting, so I had some sales experience because we train really well in consultative sales, but I never actually knew how to run a business. So even though I learned how to do it through books in my MBA program, my first civilian experiences when I was first retired, living in San Diego, expensive place to be, my focus was just finding roles where I could get good business experience, grow that business experience, and then kind of set a solid foundation. In the MBA program, I learned kind of about the concept of consulting. I did a lot of advisory work in the Marine Corps, advising with the Iraqi Army, advising with the Marine Reserves, advising in some other capacities. And I was like, this is kind of where I think I have a skill set. So I spent that first 5 years really understanding how small business works, or how business, not so much small, but understanding how business works, also understanding what it's like to be a civilian. It's just different, and I thought I was a pretty relaxed and chill Marine, but being a civilian is different than being a Marine. And so there was some shifting of who I was. So now, after all this time, I was able to eventually build on all my experience, understand how business works, understand profit and loss, and understand how to show up naturally and comfortably in civilian environments. All of that set the stage for me to be able to move forward.
Perfect. That's a tremendous background. Thank you for your service, by the way.
Thank you.
And so just to kind of wrap things up a little bit for us here, for someone hearing about the integrator role for the very first time, so say I'm a business owner, what would you want them to take away from our conversation that we had today? What would be the most important thing, Brian?
Well, thanks, Mike. For someone hearing about the integrator role for the first time, I think the biggest thing I would say is there becomes a point when every business, if they're growing and becoming more complex and having success, that they're going to hit the ceiling, right? And those are moments when they have to figure out, what do I want to do differently to continue growing and hitting that next level of success? There becomes times where financially, mentally, and emotionally, a business owner is ready to bring in someone to help them grow. And that's the role of an integrator. And there's different ways that can be done. It can be done fractionally, which I often do, which is a slice of their time. It can be done full-time. Fractional is often a great way for a business owner to build into having a full-time person. But then it's a way, if you're hearing about it for the first time, realize sometimes the way to get to the next level is to think about, what am I not doing to lead myself there? And then I'd like to say that's for the business owner, but I'd also like to say, if there's somebody listening to this that's maybe been a leader and is great at executing and getting stuff done and pulling together all the moving pieces, but they haven't figured out what the next step in their career path is, they should really take a strong look of, is this the sort of role that they could excel in? I kind of recognized that I had the ability to be an integrator, but I didn't necessarily know what the steps were to move forward in that path, which is really the foundation of why I brought the Integrator Arena forward, because I want to help people go all the way from that point of discernment to figuring out what it takes to grow and succeed long-term.
Perfect answer. So, Brian, to wind things up, thank you again for talking to us. And, I think you did a great job of telling us what EOS is and why the integrator role exists. I think that even simple guys like me, I understood everything you said, and I understand why it's important. So we'll wind it up for today, but I think we have a lot of things to talk about here in following episodes, Brian.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mike. Really enjoyed it and look forward to the next one.